Hey everybody and welcome back to BK's Bullets. Today we're going to talk about the Injustice movie. Hey everybody and welcome back to BK's Bullets. As always, I'm your host Brent and today we're going to review the Injustice movie. Now before we get to the review, please let me ask you to do one thing. Help me out and subscribe. Helps me out, helps the channel grow, lets you know when I drop new videos, all that good stuff. Smash that like button. So, this Injustice movie. I had seen the IGN review that came out last week that basically gave it like a 5 or something like that and said it was bad. And I was like, no, it can't be that bad. I had some hopes for it. It was from the same animation studio that did the Mortal Kombat recent releases with Scorpion's Revenge and Battle for the Realms, which I both liked. Both of those really good, and it was going to be rated R, so I thought they would go there, all the places that the regular DC Universe movies don't go. And then I watched it this morning, and I kind of have to agree with the IGN review that this is not a good adaptation of the Injustice storyline. And I was kind of wondering how they were going to approach it or adapt it because, you know, the Injustice storyline is not just the game. Like, the game is the end of the story. And the beginning of the story, which is mostly what you get here, is there were like, 5 years of time between the beginning events of this movie and the events of the game. So there were 53 comic books spanning, and they were the weekly releases at the time, so they were like 10 pages maybe of a regular comic book because they were half panels. It's a whole thing, but about, you want to call it like 30 issues of storyline that you're trying to adapt into an hour and 18-minute movie. Now, there's a whole lot of stuff that gets left out. There's a whole lot of stuff that gets thrown in and changed. I was on board with this movie until they decided to start wrapping it up, and that's when I was like, alright, well, obviously, this should have never been adapted because you cannot figure out a way to wrap this up in the next 20 minutes. And when they did, they threw in stuff that wasn't from the comics, which I don't normally have an opposition to if it makes sense, but what they were doing here does not make sense. And then even on top of that, they brought in the game ending at the very last minute for like the last 5 minutes, and then turned it into a cheese fest at the very end of that. So that's where the movie fell apart, and I was like, well, you really wanted the first part of the movie, the first hour of this, I think was pretty good. And then as you got to like the last 20 minutes, 30 minutes or whatever, and that's when it really started to fall apart, and it showed that they didn't have a good approach to end this. How should they have done this? I really think that, I don't know if they're going to be able to do it now that this movie kind of fails so spectacularly, but I do think there is a whole lot of room to do this as a live action show will never get greenlit, but you could have done an animated adaptation TV show of this in the same vein that you have Harley Quinn on HBO Max, you have Young Justice on HBO Max getting a season 4. You could have done this show in, over a long period of time, certainly, probably maybe 3 seasons of a show, like 36 episodes. I feel like you could do at least the story of the, first run of prequel comics in the first game. You could have ended it with a movie that has all the events of the first game. So I think that would have been a better way to adapt it, because plainly there is too much story here, too many events to really make it a nice adaptation. Because what Tom Taylor did, who wrote the Injustice comics, and you got to give also credit to the writers of the Injustice game, the guys at NetherRealm, who came up with the idea of, how do we make a superhero fighting game in the DC universe where there's no, they had done Mortal Kombat versus DC Universe prior to the Injustice game, then did Mortal Kombat 9, and then said, we have this DC license, we can do what we want with it, how do we make a pure DC fighting game and have a story mode that makes sense where Superman is fighting Batman and they're fighting each other on the same level and all these other great things. And they came up with this idea of Superman going bad and then half the DC universe going bad along with him, and then they have to, rectify that. And how do the heroes of this one world rectify it? Well, they go, because we're in the DC universe, they go to an alternate universe and get the heroes of that world to come and intervene on, the prime evil injustice world, whatever you want to call it. So that was the events of the game, was these two worlds colliding. So, and you powered up all the non-powered heroes with this special super pill that gives them the powers, basically of Superman, so that you can go to toe-to-toe with practically anybody on that. And that was the setup of how the game makes sense of Superman fighting Batman and Batman not getting killed with one punch. So that was the first game. That made sense. But the Injustice comic books had the mission of telling the story of how this Injustice world got that way, how Superman went bad, how Hal Jordan Green Lantern became a Yellow Lantern and got involved with Sinestro, how Robin was now basically Nightwing and got on Batman's bad side, and why was there bad blood with that? So you had all these questions because they chose these certain heroes as going to be the villains, why Wonder Woman was the way she was, why Shazam, Captain Marvel, whomever he was at the time, was, why was he on Superman's side? All that, Cyborg especially went bad. You had to explain all that stuff. So Tom Taylor and artists like Mike Miller, Jeremy Rapachak, whose art is the one, he is the guy that they're imitating most of all in this animated movie. And they do it to great effect. I think it matches up with his style pretty good. So, props to the animation team for that. But Tom Taylor and his team of artists and his editors had, a long time to unpack. Like, they did it over maybe 3 years or something like that. Like, it was a long time reading these books, because I bought them all when they came out digitally. For like 99 cents, you would get half a comic book or something like that. And it took maybe 3 years for them all to come out to actually tell the story of the 5 years prior to when it matched up with the game. And that was like an incredible read. This is one of my favorite comic book stories, is this alternate universe Injustice where Superman goes mad because of the tragedy that's befallen him and all that stuff. But the problem with this movie is that there's so much material to pull from, to adapt, and then to also at the same time kind of like smush together and concise, make it concise in one story. There's just too much, and I think it was a doomed experiment from the start. If you'd told me, hey, they're going to try and do this in an hour and 20 minutes and go from the beginning of the first, year one all the way to the end of the events of the first game, I would have said, well, that's a terrible idea in the first place. You really need to tell a complete story of maybe the first year of those comic books, and then maybe in a second sequel, you could get to the events of the game, and then that would be part one and part two kind of thing. But no, they want to have their cake and eat it too. Maybe they thought this wasn't going to do well because it's, it's called Injustice. It's not called Justice League Injustice. So there's no like branding on it or anything like that, even though Batman and Superman are featured prominently on the cover of the Blu-ray and the movie and all that stuff. Wonder Woman's on there too. They're the Trinity, their biggest selling characters. But you don't have the name recognition because it's not called Batman, Superman, or Justice League, right? And that's typically what they like their animated movies to be, because those have the big name recognition of those big characters. So this movie just doesn't work because it falls apart at the end because they couldn't find a way to wrap up the story. Most of the movie does tell the story of the first year of the comic books. You've got the big events like what Robin does to Nightwing in there at Arkham Asylum. Obviously, the origin with Superman and the Joker and Lois Lane is there, which I have loved. I didn't like this adaptation of it very much. I think they got Kevin Pollak to play the Joker, and he does an awful job. So it's kind of good that the Joker's not in this movie very much at all, because I really did not like his take on the Joker. And then what other stuff do you have in here? You have Superman going nuts with all the. There was a moment in the comic books, and I can't quite remember if this was an accurate like adaptation of it, but basically, Superman realizes, hey, there are Joker followers out there who are wearing his makeup and stuff, and he kind of, I think he kills them all in the comic books, and he does the same thing here in the movie too, because he's so grief-stricken and horrified and stuff. You get the same moments where he's talking to the United Nations and stopping wars and peace at all costs, and nobody hurting innocents and all that stuff. So all that stuff is there, and it's adapted very well. It's pretty much lifted like straight out of the comic book, and that also works and doesn't work because there's no fresh take, there's no new spin. It's like a straight adaptation, and sometimes the straight adaptations don't work that well, unless you've never seen it before. I think part of the reason some of these adaptations of comic books don't work in these animated films is because they're not fresh enough, or they don't have their own twist, or they're so close to it that because you've read it before, you feel like you've seen it before, and then you're no longer invested in that movie. So for me, this suffered that way a little bit. If you've not read the Injustice comic books, I think you will enjoy this movie. I think you will enjoy at least the first 3/4 of it. Maybe not the very end. You'll probably be the same way as me and think that the very end is pretty bad. But I think the first 3/4 of this movie, if you have not read the Injustice books, all the 5 years of the prequel stories or whatever, you will enjoy this film up until that certain point. And I would say if you do so, go read those comic books. You will greatly enjoy those way more than you did the film, because there's so much to uncover there, so much to unpack, so many great DC references, so many great comic characters and moments and twists and turns. If you're familiar with the DC universe, that is what makes these Injustice comic books so much fun, is because of all the weird takes. Because it's in Elseworlds, Tom Taylor has the room to play with everybody and give them all this tragedy and all this pathos, and make it super, super fun to see how everything goes down. But I don't know if you will actually enjoy the ending of the movie. I certainly did not. So I think that's my thoughts on the Injustice movie, as it were. I don't really know what they should do with it. I don't think that this movie sets up a sequel. I certainly don't want to see a sequel to this movie because of the way it ended and because of the way they wrote it. I kind of wish also that they didn't hold back as much as they did. Like, they have an R rating. There is violence. People do get killed. But the R rating here is for the ideas of these superhero characters killing each other and the violence in the beginning of the film, which they go all out for. But me looking at this film and realizing, hey, this is like the exact same studio that did the Mortal Kombat stuff. So good, so bloody, so gory. I'm not saying I want that same level here, but there were times where they pulled away and showed a different shot, in the same way that like a PG-13 superhero movie would as well. When I was like, you guys already have the R rating, you already had these really violent moments in the beginning of the film, why are you turning away now towards the end of the film? It didn't make sense to me. Like, there's no effects budget, it's all drawings anyway. And instead of showing what you showed, you could actually show the act, or at least a glimpse of it, to amplify the horror of it. That was one of the other things that makes the comic books so much fun and so horrifying, is that they don't pull away from those violent moments when Superman goes mad. They show you the horror, they show you the terror. I think this also, them pulling away makes this movie suffer a little bit, because we've had 2 seasons of The Boys on television right now. You've had Homelander be the evil Superman, as it were, and you've seen these horrific moments of what an evil Superman can do, so that when you are actually here with the real character that Homelander's based on, this guy above my shoulder here, and he's gone bad, and you're seeing, he's doing horrific things, and then you don't show them. In an R-rated film, it takes away from the moment. If you had done this in a PG-13 way or something, say you were crazy enough to attempt it, then, if you were consistent all the way through, then maybe you could build some tension because of what you don't see. right? But because you gave us such a big taste of it before, we're now like the bloodlust is in like a good, like you're watching a good horror movie, you know, you're waiting for those gory moments to shock and scare you. And then when you don't deliver on them, especially with a character of now you're kind of watching, not gleefully, but interested of seeing this character of Superman turned on his head and irredeemable and, just kind of like you're horrified of the fact that this character is doing all these things. You're taken away from that horror for what reason? Because you're going to try and redeem him at the very end of the movie. That's where this movie fails, and I think that's kind of why I didn't like the ending as much, because they decided to try and redeem this Superman at the end of this film and give it like a pseudo happy ending, when in the comics, in the games, that is not what happens at all. Like, the end of the games, it's evil Superman versus alternate world Superman, and they pound the crap out of each other, and evil Superman does not redeem himself. He still thinks he's the absolute authority. He still thinks he's absolutely right the entire time. And the game ends with like him in prison. He's like looking up, glaring at Batman or something like that. And, he's angry as hell. And you're terrified of what could happen next because he's still a threat to society. So the fact that they try and redeem this Superman in the animated version takes away from that terror. It takes away from the purpose of the story, to show how one man can, it's kind of like the Killing Joke in a way, how one man has such a bad day that he goes absolutely nuts. Like the Joker couldn't do it with Batman in the Killing Joke, but Tom Taylor made the Joker do it with Superman in Injustice in these comic books. And when you have those same events happen in the animated movie and then change the ending, it degrades the overall goodness of the story. So just take it as an Elseworlds. And if you haven't seen any of the comic books or the games, I think you will enjoy it. But if you have read everything, and I guess I can't really recommend it. If you've read everything and you've played all the games as I have, I would say don't waste your time on this movie. Just go back and reread the books. If you do catch it on HBO Max when it comes on there later down the line, I'd say that's a perfectly acceptable way to watch it. But this is definitely not worth $20. It is a bad adaptation, so I do have to agree with IGN for that. But if you haven't seen anything, if you haven't read it, maybe you want to try it out. Maybe you want to rent it. I guess I could recommend it that way. But this is one of those weird movies where it's kind of straddling the line for me. I know I've gone on another 10 minutes here from when I was going to wrap it up, but it straddles the line. Like if you like The Boys but haven't read or played any of the Injustice games, I could say, yeah, you could try this movie out. It's not great, but you might enjoy a lot of it, right? But if you've read the games, if you've read the books, if you played the games, all that stuff, I can't recommend this adaptation to you. So in that way, it's kind of straddling the line of like, is it good or is it bad? And if it is good, it still falls apart at the end. But if you've read everything, it is still kind of bad all the way through. So it's kind of a weird thing. I don't know how to give it a star rating. I would probably give it like a 2, maybe. Like a poor, not average, not good, not great. Maybe like a 2. But I can say my highest recommendation comes with reading the Injustice comic books, playing the video games, all that stuff. That is phenomenal. A phenomenal experience if you have the money and the resources, the time. I mean, they're collected everywhere. You can get them all digitally. You can get trade paperbacks of like year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. There's 2 giant omnibuses that are out that go, I think they go through the Injustice 2 comic books as well. So my highest recommendation goes to that entire saga. This is a universe I love because of those books, because of the games, and to see this animated adaptation kind of fail so mediocrely really hurts. So we'll end it there. Let me know what you guys thought of this adaptation down below in the comments, and we will see you guys next time in the Funny Pages.